y'all. Um, Thank you for joining me on another video. Last week I was starting a video and then my brain was like, nah. And I stopped and thought I'd get myself, you know, relaxed and stuff. Well, video never happened. I think part of it is because this past Friday, April 1st, I had a hearing to renew the protection order for my ex. And because by law, he has a right to defend himself as to why the protection order doesn't need to be in place. And thankfully, he didn't show up. And thankfully, the judge granted my request for the protection order to be in effect for another year. And I guess I was all kind of worried about it. I didn't think he would show, but with my ex, you never know. So all of these scenarios were running in my mind, and that's probably where my brain fog came from. And I think I'm kind of coming down from that, so I'm kind of a little off today, but I wanted to make a video because there's something I really want to talk about. First of all, the good news that I couldn't talk about on the previous video, I can now talk about. I got a new job as a family support worker. I couldn't think there for a minute. I told y'all my brain is just barely functioning. Um, and it is a job that I've been wanting forever. Helping others get through the system, giving them the support that I wish I had had early on, helping these families do what they need to do to get out of the CPS system. So it's going to be not liking challenge, but it's going to be nice. And so I'm excited about that. Earlier in the week, I had an appointment with my chiropractor. It was going over things where my spine is healed, things that still need improvement. It was basically going over the assessment that was done. Every 6 months or so, he does an assessment on my spine, takes x-rays, does nerve testing to make sure that we're going the right direction. And his assistant is relatively new to the office, not super new, but she's not there on Saturdays, and usually it's Saturdays that I go for my appointments. So she didn't know me too well. I've only seen her a few times. So she came in to the room that I was in to set up the computer with my file and stuff so the doctor can go over it. And I was briefly giving her a brief story of my spine and what it's been through, how I started and where I am now, which vast improvement. And talking about how once I left my ex, after just not even a month, my spine started improving by leaps and bounds because of the stress. As I've told y'all before, trauma goes to your bones, and that is literal. That's not even a figure of speech. And so we were talking about that, And I mentioned how I had been married 32 years before I finally laughed. And she's like, wow, you've done all of this stuff in 2 years and you left him at 32 years of marriage? I said, yeah. And that got me to thinking how, what I want to talk about today, because my daughter once said, and it made me cry, kind of, sort of, when she told me this, that what I did was the epitome of what never too late looks like. And quite honestly, I wish I had left 13 years before I did, because my kids wouldn't have endured the trauma that they endured with my ex had I left back in '07 when I called the police on him the first time. And that's something that I'll regret for quite a while, if not the rest of my days on this earth. I've somewhat come to peace with it. I don't cry about it as much as I used to, but it's something that'll always be in the back of my mind, and I still kick myself for. But in talking about being married for 32 years before I left, that's what I want to talk about today, how it is never too late to leave your abuser. I don't care if you've been with your abuser 50 years. If you're being abused, you deserve to not be abused. And you deserve an abuse-free life. So it's never too late to leave. Admittedly, the longer I stayed with him, each year that passed made it harder to leave, because I kept thinking, well, I stayed this long, I might as well just stay longer. His health is not the best. He'll probably croak in a year or two anyway. And I know that's coarse thinking, and because his health was supposedly not good at that point, when all evidence now points to the fact that it wasn't as bad as he portrayed, but that's a whole other story in itself. But, I mean, his health isn't perfect right now, but from what I'm hearing, all indications is that it's better than what he was wanting others to believe. And I'll just leave it at that, because I could get in a whole rant about that alone. And so each year that I stayed, it was harder and harder to leave, because I kept thinking, well, I've been together this long, 25 years, 27 years, 30 years, and it got harder and harder. Finally, what got me to say enough, ironically, is what should have been enough back in '07, but I was too focused on what I was going through to even think about them. And I didn't even think about the fact that the kids were being traumatized like I was. I don't know why it didn't occur to me, because I look back now and I see how traumatizing, if nothing else, how traumatizing it was to hear their father abusing their mother and hearing their mother cry over something he said or did. And I didn't realize they heard as much as they did. And that is ultimately what got me to leave, is because for one thing, he was still traumatizing, the two older ones especially. Even though they were adults, they moved away, they had their own lives. He was still traumatizing them because every once in a while he would send them way out, whacked out messages. Both of them, something would happen where he would start talking to either one of the two older ones, and they'd start thinking, okay, well, maybe he's changed, maybe we can have a relationship. And then something happened, he would snap, basically pulling a rug out from under them, and starts spewing hatred and stupidity and heaven knows what. And it got to the point where they both cut him off completely because of that. And I don't blame them. Thing is, they cut me off too, quite understandably. As one of my children put it, that child felt like they were my dirty little secret, because I had to sneak around and text them. I'm purposely not using the correct grammar because it's that child's story to tell, so I'm just being general about it. But and the child got really mad at me and said, look, unless you can own up and admit that you're talking to me, I don't want to hear from you. And I didn't blame my child. In fact, both of the two older ones, really basically said similar to each other. I mean, similar to what I just said to me. And I don't blame them because it hurt. It hurt not only that their father was being stupid towards them simply because they refused to take his baloney anymore, now that they were adults and didn't have to live with him, but that I wasn't strong enough and protective enough to tell him, too bad, so sad, I'm talking to my kids. And that hurt them terribly. And part of me was hoping against hope that he would change, and the more I think about it, the more I think that this was part of the manipulation, because in looking up things about narcissists, they're very manipulative, and they're not beyond doing things like this where they give you just this much hope that you're going to have peace and that things are going good. They let you get comfortable and then bam, pull the rug right out from under your feet, and then you fall flat on your back. And he did that so many times, and there were so many times that during the good part, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is God's answer, maybe God's healing, because y'all, I prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And no, I don't blame God. And I think that's another video that I'm gonna go into about how I don't blame God for what happened. Long story short, the person has to realize their need to change before God's going to change them, because God's not a divine rapist. But that's a whole other video in and of itself. But I would think, oh my goodness, is he finally wanting to have a relationship with the kids and the two older ones and talk to them? And then bam, he'd snap. Something they'd say would make him snap, and all hope was lost. And for so many years, I was hoping against hope that he would change. But what got me to end it was coming to the realization that it wasn't going to change. Because as far as he was concerned, he wasn't the one doing wrong. They were, or I was. And when it comes to their relationship with him, it was their fault. When it comes to what they were doing or not doing with their lives, it was my fault. There was both of us there. We were both parenting, or what you call parenting the kids. But yet it was all my fault. And yeah, I was at fault in a lot of things. I was so focused on what I was going through, I wasn't even considering the kids. And I look back at that and think, oh my goodness, how could I have not seen? And I don't know how I couldn't see. I guess I was so clouded with what I was going through, I didn't even consider the kids. And it was knowing that he was continuing to abuse them and traumatize them, even though they had completely cut off ties to him at all. One child blocked his number. Another one was about to. And barely even talked to me. One of my children told me that so many times they wanted to text me but didn't, because they were afraid that he would see my phone, because as I've told y'all before, he would just randomly grab my phone, even out of my hand, to see if I'm messaging anybody that he didn't want me to message. Like I was going to leave any evidence on my phone, knowing that he checks my phone. But that was his mindset. So the child was afraid to text me just to say, hey mom, I love you, because of that. And that's what gave me the courage to leave after 32 years. Because I knew that would never have a relationship with my kids. And I knew that once my youngest moved out, that there would not be a relationship with him either, because then once he moved out, he would then voice his opinion on things and not allow my ex to be toxic towards him, and so the same pattern would happen. And I couldn't picture not having a relationship with my kids anymore. And that's what got me to leave, because that day that I walked out that door, just like nothing happened the night before. I purposely did it that way so he wouldn't suspect anything. And I'm walking to my truck that I had at the time, and I'm fighting with myself. I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. And I'm praying to God, please give me the strength to do this. And then what came to my mind is, I'm never gonna have a relationship with these kids if I don't. And that's what got me, that's what pushed me over the edge, so to speak, and solidified my decision. And I'm not saying it was easy, because over the next couple of, that day, I felt like I could breathe easier, especially after I went to court and filed for the protection order. And then I felt a little freer, but not a whole lot. And then the next day, when I got the email that the protection order was in fact put in place, the judge signed it, that's when I felt safe. Because I had tried to get a protection order several months before that, but I didn't word it well enough. And so because I didn't word it well enough, it didn't fit the parameters. Because there are strict parameters for being able to get a protection order. And looking from the law side of it, no prejudice or anything, I can see the reasoning. It's just hard to see it when it involves you. So I didn't word it well enough to fit the parameters of getting a protection order. I can't talk, So it was denied. So I was worried that, I learned my lesson, and I remembered what I wrote, the gist of what I wrote, several months before. And I learned, and I thought long and hard about what I wrote in that petition on March 10th. In fact, it took me about, 45 minutes or so to write everything and to fill it all out thoroughly, because I thought about each word I put in there to express my fear. And evidently I worded it well enough that it was granted. And over the next few months, when it started hitting me that I'm free. I can do things. The first time I did something on my own, it felt so good. Um, I had this thing, I was asked recently, what do I do to relieve stress? Go for a drive. Like a motorcycle rider will tell you, there is nothing more stress relieving than getting on that bike and hitting the road. And that's how I am with driving. Me and motorcycles don't mix too well. But um, I will get in the car, drive, and it's relaxing. I can just turn my mind off, kind of, sort of, where obviously I'm focusing on the road. But I don't have to think about anything. And in not having to think about anything but the road and driving, it actually relaxes my mind and it helps me think about things I need to think about when I'm finished. Because then my mind isn't blocked. Because when I get all stressed and uptight, my mind literally locks. It's almost like a steel helmet that goes around my brain like that and prevents me from thinking. And so I always loved going for drives. I guess maybe that has something to do with one of the few good memories I have with my bio father was we would go for long drives. We'd need to get out of the house and had nothing to do. Come on, girl, let's go for a drive. Get in his truck and just start driving. So I guess that's where I got it from. But my ex never wanted to drive. Never wanted to go for a drive, even a nice little drive in the country. Even a nice little drive, in a park when it snowed. We have a beautiful park that's filled with evergreen trees. And my thing is I loved going driving there when there's a fresh snowfall on those trees. Those pine trees, they look absolutely gorgeous when there's snow on them. And he did a few times we would go, and I guess he realized how much I loved it, so he didn't want to do it anymore. So the first time, I'll never forget, it was a Saturday morning, and I had nowhere to go really. It was in the height of COVID. COVID had just everything had shut down literally 1 week to the day after I called the cops on him, which that in of itself was God protecting me, because trying to work from home with him home, I'd have been even more unsafe, being as we were stuck in the house, not being able to go much of anywhere. So that first Saturday morning, when I had really nowhere to go because everything was pretty much shut down, I'm like, I can go for a drive. It dawned on me, wow, I can go for a drive. So I got dressed, just threw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, got in my truck, and I drove through the country. A place I've been wanting to go for months. Every once in a while there's a place here where I live, that's about a half-hour drive in the country. And every so often, every couple of months or so, I get this hankering to go there, drive there, maybe drive around a little bit there in this little town, and then come back, and I'm fine. Well, he'd always make up some lame excuse as to why we couldn't. Oh yeah, we could do that. Why don't we plan for tomorrow? Tomorrow never came. Or next week, or, but of course it never came. And so, y'all, that felt so freeing that I could actually get in my truck and drive wherever the blazes I wanted to, and not have to answer to anybody, not have my phone blowing up with the person on the other end yelling at me because I'm not home with him, basically being tortured. And that's when I realized, no, this is too good. My relationship with my two older kids was getting wonderful. There's still a long way to go, especially with one of my kids, because one of my kids was hurt really bad. But there's vast improvement, and there's opportunity now where there wasn't then. Because if he was still around, there would not be that opportunity to heal, even as much as we have. It was so wonderful to have that, to know that I could work on healing with all three of my children. My youngest, who was still living with me at the time, started coming out of his room more, and we'd have actual conversations. I found out that he stayed in his room most of the time because he didn't want to verbally push back against his father and have my ex backlash on me. Because whenever the kids would push back with him verbally, if he would say something and they'd push back and say, no, you're not, or whatever, it would come back to me. Oh, he'd yell at them, but it would come back to me as I was a terrible mother because I didn't teach them to respect their father. Well, their father wasn't someone to respect. And it was so wonderful to, the first 6 months, I didn't even think about the fact that, wow, I'm doing this now, and I was married to him 32 years. Because it just felt so good to be free. And then when the divorce was official, October 21st of 2020, literally 7 months and 11 days after he was removed, that's when I think it started to hit. Wow, we've been together 32 years, and this is what has come of a 32-year marriage. And I still don't think of things, like, wow, I was married 32 years. That's a big deal. I don't think about it much anymore, I guess, because it just feels so good. And that's what I want to encourage you. If you've been in a relationship 5 years, 20 years, or even 40 years, it doesn't matter, because once you're out of that relationship, it is so freeing and liberating. Because just today, I have a very, very dear friend that has to stay in assisted living home because of health issues. So I go visit her like every other week because she lives in a town that's a little bit over an hour's drive, about an hour, 15, hour, 20-minute drive. And I'm able to go see her alone, without my ex, because I've seen more of her now in the past 2 years, even though she's living in an assisted living place, than I think I've seen her in like the last 5 years of my marriage, because I could never go see her alone, because he always had to be with me because he wanted to talk to the husband. And he aggravated the daylights out of the husband, but the husband loved me, as a friend. And so put up with him, the ex, so they could see me. And so today, I was able to go see my friend, and we had a nice visit, like a nice 2-hour visit. And it felt so nice to be able to visit and not have to worry about time. I mean, even 2 years out, it's been 2 years since he was removed. But I still think about that, because for so many years, y'all, if I would go see my mama and he wasn't, on the rare occasion that I could go see my mom without him around, without him coming with me, I would literally be there for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, and he's texting me, no rush, but how long are you going to be? Yeah, no rush. That was my clue that give it another 15, 20 minutes and I should go. I would be lucky if I could spend an hour and a half with my mother and my sister, because my mom lives with my sister. I would be so lucky if I could spend an hour and a half, 2 hours. I felt absolutely blessed before he would protest and say things like, well, I'm hungry. Do you know what you want for dinner? No. I haven't figured that out yet. Well, I'm just going to fix manwich because I'm hungry now. No, that's going to mess things up with my plans of what I'm going to use with the ground beef. And he's like, well, I got to cook something because I'm hungry. So I'd have to come home. Because for one thing, I was so tired of manwich, it wasn't funny. 2 years later, I still have a couple of cans of manwich in my cupboard, because I can't bring myself to eat it that much. Right before he was removed, there was a sale on cans of sandwich, so I bought a bunch of them, like 5 or 6 of them, because that's what he ate. And in 2 years' time, when he left, there was still like 4 cans left. I still got 2 cans. So in 2 years' time, my youngest and I have eaten sandwich twice. Because he can't really stomach sandwich either. Because he'd fix it all the time. And I'd have to force myself to eat it because I couldn't cook something different. Because, we didn't have extra food. I had just enough for the pay period. So I would have to deal with it and choke it down. And so it felt nice to go see my friend and have a nice 2-hour visit, just talking, reminiscent, whatever. And taking a leisurely drive back home. I still don't take that for granted, even though it's been 2 years, because it still amazes me. It still amazes me when I look at my 3-year-old van that's mine, that I'm making payments on. That does not elude me. And I'm saying all of this in hopes that if whoever's watching this that is going through a very rough time and is contemplating leaving their abuser, it's never too late. Like I've said several times throughout this video, doesn't matter if you've been married or been together with your abuser for 1 year or 50. You deserve to be treated well. And you deserve to have peace. And if you're living with someone who is toxic and not giving you peace, you deserve to leave. Doesn't matter that you've been with the person 10, 20, 40 years. That is irrelevant. What is relevant is that you have the right to leave, and that it is never, ever too late. One of my kids told me that they were glad that my ex didn't die before I left, because our relationship would not ever be healed because of that, because it took his death as opposed to me leaving, choosing to leave. And I see where my child came from with that, because if I'd have waited until my ex died, that tells my child that they weren't important enough for me to leave. And that is also what keeps me away. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I don't like speaking definitively, because the old adage, never say never, because you never know. Usually the one thing you say never about is the one thing that happens, at least in my life. But I can say with 1,000% certainty that I'm not ever taking my ex back, because trust has been totally obliterated. I could never trust that any supposed change is legitimate and not just to remain out of jail or to convince me, so I'll take him back and he'll be 10 times worse. But the main reason that if, hypothetically, I were to ever consider taking my ex back, which again, I'm not, my kids is what, the thought of my kids is what's keeping me away. Because with him around, I can't have that relationship with my kids, because with him, he has to be first on everything. He has to be high priority above everything, including God. Because whenever there were times and God dealt with me with this, I put him above God, because there were times I wanted to go to church, but I didn't, because he wasn't going, and I was scared of what he would do if I went, because he always accused me of trying to look more spiritual than him. And so I wouldn't go. I would say, well, he would claim he wasn't feeling well and he wasn't up to going, but you can go. I always felt like that was a test. And he would swear it wasn't, but I knew it was. The only time I would go was when he would absolutely insist, go, you need to go. And he would insist me to go. I realize this now, because that's, with me out of the house, he could look at whatever he wanted on the computer or on his phone uninhibited. Because there were many times I'd go to church without him. He was supposedly sick and not feeling well. I'd come home to him on the computer. And I know what he was looking at. It's like, okay, you said you were sick, but yet you're on the computer. No. So, this is a longer video than I figured it would be. But ultimately, I want to encourage you who's watching this and you're still in an abusive relationship. It does not matter how long you've been in that relationship. You have a right to leave. You deserve peace and to be treated well. And if you're one who has just left and the relationship was 20, 30 years and you're just leaving and you're wondering, well, we've been together this long, should I try to work it out? No. Sadly, abusers don't change. Is it extremely, extremely rare? And even then, the appearance of change could all be a false change just to get you back. Because no amount of counseling is going to get them to change if they don't see the need to change. Y'all have a good week. Stay blessed. And I will see you next time. Bye.